42 attendees so far on the call, and I want to get started. Welcome everybody to the 2020 Virtual Land Conference sponsored by Land.com Network. I greatly appreciate everyone, your willingness to attend this new format that was dealt to us, and I think we're all looking for a few aces that we can take out of the next couple days. So my name is Kyle Hansen, and I'm the 2020 National President of Realtors Land Institute. Thank you all again for joining us today. While we are sad that we cannot have our event previous land in San Antonio, we are grateful that you have been able to turn this event into a virtual conference, allowing even more people to join us and participate. This is our 14th annual conference, and it continues to be the leading event for land brokers to make deals and learn about the hottest trends in the industry. Of course, this event is not possible without our partners. Thank you to Land.com Network for being our major sponsor for this virtual event. And thank you to all of our partners that you see on your screen for the support, which is vital to our organization. For those of you at home that may be unfamiliar with Realtors Land Institute, let me tell you that RLI is the voice of land and the go-to organization for land real estate professionals and all things related to land.
Our next breakout presenter is George Harvey with the Harvey team out of Telluride, Colorado. Last year, George served as the chair of the National Association of Realtors Global Business and Alliance Committee. As such, he oversaw the development of NAR's formal relationships with 101 international real estate organizations in 84 different countries. Having conducted his first international transaction 34 years ago, George has been a leader in the international real estate business, and in 2013 did the largest international transaction ever in the Telluride, Colorado market at $17 million. In his 35-year career, George has served as president of the Telluride Association of Realtors, twice received the Telluride Realtor of the Year award. He was the 2010 president of the Colorado Association of Realtors, received Colorado's Realtor of the Year award in 2015, and served as a vice president of NAR in 2017. George has completed over 700 real estate transactions in excess of $550 million in sales over his career. Last November, he was awarded a lifetime recognition for serving the global real estate community and developing international real estate relations on behalf of NAR's 1.4 million realtor members. George, you are the perfect person to tell us how we can build our global real estate business. Please tell us how to get started.
Well, thank you, Amanda. I should tell you, Amanda, I made up all that stuff. So I'm very flattered to be here today, and my goal to the attendees is very simple. Whether you've ever done an international transaction or you're very proficient at this particular niche, I hope today that I can give you a few tips and guidances on either how to continue to develop your practice or to start it. The first thing I'd like to do, I've been involved in the land and ranch niche for about 25 years. And I want to give a little comparison between, at least my thoughts about the comparison between being a land and ranch broker and an international real estate practitioner. Both are extremely specialized. My understanding is there's about 1,400 to 1,500 RLI members, and maybe a third of those are ALCs. If you think about that, out of 1.4 million practitioners, realtors, that's a very small group. The things I've learned in RLI is there's brokers here, some of you on this presentation, that are experts in income producing row crops, timber sales, orchard sales, gentleman ranches, and my involvement with RLI has taught me how specific the knowledge is in each one of those niches. That I tell my friends in the residential business, if you have the opportunity to list some land, income producing land or ranch, please partner up with a RLI or hopefully an ALC that can help you look good and do the best job for your client, whether they're a seller or a buyer. I'm starting out with that because I know you all on this call get that it is that important to build your education and knowledge in the land business. It is exactly the same for developing international business, except possibly more complicated. Even in the United States, if you're practicing real estate in a dairy farm in Upper New York, the customs and nuances for that particular market might be very, very different than selling a dairy farm in Arkansas. We're a big country, have different customs and different ways we do business. Even in the state of New York, you can't write your own contract. You have to get a lawyer to do that. So there's nuances everywhere. The first item that I've got on the slideshow for you there is a book called Kiss, Bow, or Shake. That book I got the first copy of about 35 years ago, and it's in its second revision. Of all the things today that we're going to visit about, I'm going to put that book as number one. It covers the customs, traditions, cultural nuances in 60 different countries. And what do I mean by that? It will discuss with you how people in Canada, for example, which you think all the business is done really similar to the United States, it isn't. In Canada, they have a tremendous Asian population in the Vancouver area that really ballooned after Hong Kong went back to the Chinese government. The influx of Asian and Chinese into that region was overwhelming, and they have their own culture and customs that we'll discuss a little bit later. But Canada, of course, is a lot English, but has a huge French segment in Toronto. In fact, the second largest real estate company in Canada was founded in Toronto by a French-speaking people. About 2 years ago, I had the privilege to go to the Canadian Association of Realtors annual convention in Ottawa. And the thing that I noticed immediately at their board of directors meeting was every presentation that was given, the speakers were fluent in English and in French, probably 90% of the time. That's a tremendous difference in just a country that shares the largest common border with us. The reason I'm pointing that out is, in this entire presentation, I want to emphasize how important it is to do your homework and study about the countries that you may want to be involved in, which I'm going to suggest this. It's been my experience that in developing your practice, international practice, I highly recommend that you try to pick one or two countries that you have some kind of connection with. And that could be either culturally, family, where you vacationed, or just where you have interest in, or some place that you'd like to know more about. Personally, I think it's pretty hard to have an international practice in many different countries because it's too complicated. The National Association of Realtors is, Amanda mentioned in the beginning, has relationships, I'll explain what that means, with 101 different international real estate organizations. Think of like National Association of Realtors, so 101 of those in 84 different countries. In Japan, there's not one big real estate company, there's, association, there's 6. And the National Association of Realtors, you as a realtor, we have signed agreements with 5 out of 6 of those associations, and they all tend to be very regional. So if you were going to do business in Japan, if that's the country you would like to develop real estate practice with, you would want to focus on one particular area, whether it's Tokyo or Osaka or whatever island area that you might have interest in. You would want to find out which association represents that area. So making that a little bit more complicated, but on a personal basis, it's probably the most enriching part of my wife's and my life, is getting to know people from so many different countries and their customs. The upside in business is that one transaction actually came through a referral through a land broker. So my involvement in land helped me land a $17 million ranch sale from a client at that time that was living in Singapore. Those connections sometimes are not apparent, but I can just say the more that you interact and network, and as we are networking right now, the better chance you have on some of those connections coming to fruition. The next point I have on the slide there is global regional market nuances. When I got my CIPS designation was about 22 years ago, and the course material was 7 days, and they've reduced that to 5 days, and I think that's fine. In these 5 days, you're going to see 3 major regional markets, and that is Europe and Western Europe is one. I'd call the Pacific Rim and Asian market is 2, and then the Americas, which is basically Central and South America. That covers so many countries, I think that's probably enough. Being in the land business, NAR has finally, the last couple of years, started to do international land transactions, and where those transactions are meeting with either United States sellers or United States buyers. I'll get back where to look for those in a minute. Currency exchange rate issues. I used to struggle with this a little bit, understanding exactly what it means when it says that we have a strong dollar. So I'll give you this example. During the recession, which in the United States, was roughly from 2008 through about 2012, we had a tremendous amount of real estate that went into foreclosure and basically became very affordable to international buyers. One of the biggest buyers of property in the United States was Canada. Canada's dollar, which some people call the maple leaf, was stronger than the United States dollar about 10, 11, and 12 years ago. Today, it's exactly opposite. It means in the recession, a Canadian dollar could buy more real estate in the United States than the American dollar. So if a property in Florida, that's where is probably the #1 state in the United States where Canadians bought. They tend to go toward warmer climates. Arizona is pretty big for them. If a dollar would buy $100,000 property in Florida, it would only take $80,000 in Canadian money to buy the same property. In other words, they were getting a 20% discount. Now that the United States dollar is stronger than the Canadian dollar, it takes them about 20% more Canadian dollars to buy real estate in the United States. And in that 10-year period since a recession, our real estate got really expensive. So generally speaking, we had a tremendously booming international market in the United States from about the recession up until about 3 years ago. And that's where it comes into the regional market nuances. Some areas in the world, markets and regional economies just may be doing better than other regions. In other words, their dollars buy more. So in the last 3 or 4 years, the investment from foreign countries or foreign individuals, into the United States has gone down 3 years in a row. Most of the people that follow international transactions attribute that to the fact that our real estate got pretty expensive. It wasn't international money, just like you, when you're buying in the United States, you're looking for where you can find the best deals. We do have something that is, I think, internationally accepted, and that is people in, I'll take the fellow that bought the ranch. He's very, very wealthy, in the hundreds of millions of dollars of wealth, now in the billion-dollar category. I just asked him, why are you buying this ranch in Colorado? And his answer was, I make my living doing some very risky things. I trade currencies against each other globally. It's very easy to make money and it's very easy to lose money. But what I like about your country is your real estate laws, property rights are very, very strong. So I know that I will be able to keep ownership of this property. And if worse comes to worse and I really make some mistakes in my investment, that historically your property values over long periods of time have held up really well. In other words, he looked at it as a hedge, a safety place against riskier investments that he was doing. I think that is one of the greatest things that land and ranch brokers can offer to international investors over the period of decades. And that's the way a lot of international buyers look, not so much short term, but long term. Our country has had a very stable economy with stable currencies and great laws. As he says, my children can inherit this property if I goof up on everything else I'm doing. He says, on top of that, it's beautiful. But the biggest single reason was safety and great property rights laws in the United States. So I've talked a little bit about regional nuances, how the economies, if you're following them in South America right now, there's some huge challenges going on in Argentina, Venezuela, Chile, of volatility in their currency. It is, a lot of those currencies are having a hard time keeping their values. That's the reason why in all of our lifetimes that the dollar, United States dollar, the Ben Franklin, is still the most stable currency in the world. The next item there is tax issues. All countries that I'm aware of have either favorable or unfavorable laws investing into their country from people outside of their country. I'll give you an example. If you're a foreign national buying country property into the United States, and the seller happens to be a foreign national, the United States government wants that seller to pay taxes on their gain if they made a gain. The kind of the quirky way that happens is it's the responsibility of the buyer to make sure that 15% of the proceeds of that sale is held by the title company as a holding entity so that federal taxes can be paid. One pretty serious implication there is that the buyer's broker is also responsible. So it is critical that when you do an international transaction, in my opinion, that you get a title company and maybe title companies usually all have lawyers, the bigger ones do, that handle international transactions, get hooked up with their lawyer that shows them how that proceeds has to be held, and the seller can file taxes and see if there's a possibility on the next tax year whether they get any of that money back or have to pay more taxes. It's sort of like a surety bond. If you buy property in Japan, which I'll talk about a little bit later, just one small nuance there. It is 100% okay for foreign nationals or international people to buy and own property in Japan, but everyone outside of the country, we would be foreigners there, have to pay an 8% tax at the time of closing. That's a fairly big tax. And so in investing in that country, buyers have to decide whether or not that is a negative or positive thing. Now, before I go to the next slide, I want to talk just a little bit more about cultural differences. There's some things, our cultures, there's so many different cultures in the world that we get pretty comfortable with each other here in this country, but sometimes it's easy to offend somebody and you don't know how you did that. All of the world generally is good about exchanging gifts. So sometimes when we do transactions in the United States, we want to give a gift to the buyer or to the seller client, and we have to think about what might be appropriate for a gift for that person, depending on the size of the transaction or where you live or where they live. Maybe you want to buy them something that reminds them of the positive closing. Internationally, it's even far more complicated. In that book I told you, Kiss, Bow, or Shake, there's a section in there about what are appropriate gifts. Even things as what kind of wrapping paper is appropriate. For example, in the United States, most wedding gifts, or many of them, are wrapped in white paper. In Japan, white paper is used at funerals. So it wouldn't be a very good idea. It's sort of the symbol of death. You would want to be sure you do not give a gift to a Japanese cultural person, even in this country, in white wrapping paper. The best colored paper for Japanese, and in some extents in the Asian culture, is red. If you think about all of the Chinese restaurants you've been in your life, red is a common theme, a common color. Red represents success, good fortune, good future. So that to them is a very big deal. Trust me on this. As simple as that might seem, it is, don't underestimate how that can cause ill will with the Asian culture. Take it seriously. That's why I'm going to recommend to every one of you that want to get into the international business or continue, get yourself a copy of that book. It only costs about $25 and you'll find it fascinating. Amanda, if you'll roll to the next slide, please. here are some tools that you can use no matter where you are in the beginning of your practice. So global practices around the world. What does that mean? I'm very happy to tell you that about 2 years ago, I felt like I got some good influence with the NAR staff in this way. Sometimes people can forget that it's a little intimidating to begin in a niche that seems a little complicated, like global business. So what I got all of the NAR global ambassadors to do, I'll explain who they are and what that means. There's about 30 global ambassadors that travel around the world and forge the relationships between the National Association of Realtors and their associations. There are 6 regional coordinators. So what that means, there's one regional coordinator that represents all of South America. And within South America, all those countries, there's about 5 or 6 other regional coordinators that travel to those countries to their annual convention. The purpose of that is to forge relationships between NAR and those associations, and those 101 international organizations actually sign agreements with NAR that they'll practice by our code of ethics and subject transactions to arbitrations. Think about if you're doing a transaction in Argentina and you're representing a buyer, you want to feel pretty good that you can get paid. If you have a challenge in the United States, we have pretty good processes you can go through. Not all countries have that available, but I think NAR has done a fabulous job of creating those relationships where you have a much better chance of practicing at the same level of ethics and arbitration with all those countries. The niche that I helped get started was this real estate practices around the world, which you can go to on the NAR global website and just put in. You can see a search engine within NAR's website, global real estate practices around the world. What will come up is an alphabetical order of 55 different countries and how they do real estate, some basic questions. So with NAR staff, and we have about 80 members on that committee. I've been privileged to be on and off of that committee over 20 years. There's some wonderful people there, given a lot of time. I'm going to give you an example here that I have of just, I'll talk about 2 countries. One is United Kingdom. Now you would think, since basically our forefathers, a lot of them came from England, that they've been at real estate in some sense a lot longer than we have. But you might find this interesting. I'm just going to go through the typical questions that you'll find for those 55 different countries. Are there any restrictions on property or land ownership for citizens in United Kingdom? No, there's not. Are there any restrictions on property ownership from foreigners? No, but additional taxes. So you'll want to know what those taxes are. What are the ownership rate? Generally speaking, titles that are held outside of United Kingdom is about 97,000 properties. So there's a lot of foreign ownership of property in the United Kingdom. Is there exclusive representation? And who represents the buyer or the seller? It's interesting in England that about 90% of the sellers are represented by, they call them estate brokers. And there's an estate broker association like NAR but most of the buyers are not represented, a very small portion. Who pays the commission fees in the UK? The seller. Buyers kind of have to get the buyers to pay them. So that's something you want to be aware of. Here's the thing I find really interesting. There's no current licensing in United Kingdom. You can just practice real estate by saying you practice real estate, or getting listings, or having worked in it. This was up until April 2018. They had talked about imposing regulations and minimum standards, but they haven't done it yet. Another thing that we take for granted in the United States, we have a fairly, as much complaining as we do about the multiple listing system, the United Kingdom does not have a multiple listing system, and most of the rest of the world doesn't. A key thing, when any of you that are seasoned a little and use international portals to try to market your property, there's a lot of property portals in the world, but there's very few cooperative sales agreements. In other words, here, we're accustomed to, if I list a property and it's a 6% commission, seller gets, listing broker gets 3, and the buyer broker gets 3. That's sort of all of those are negotiable. I'm just picking numbers out of the air, but that's just kind of how we do it here. Most of the rest of the world does not do that. You're basically on your own, and you have to cut your deal with your seller or buyer individually. And on referral fees, if you're going to work internationally, referral fees are harder to negotiate and get for a very simple reason. I think you'll be shocked on this next thing I'm going to tell you. What is a typical commission in the United Kingdom? The range is about 1% to 1.3%. And the average time a home is on the market, I don't have stats for land, I'm sorry, is 17 to 20 years. And another major thing about doing business in the United Kingdom, there's no title insurance. The contracts are written by attorneys, and it takes 14 to 18 weeks to get that negotiation process legally contracted, and then the contracts are recorded without title insurance. Those contracts then become binding. So the process I'm showing you there on a country that you might think has been doing this more sophisticated than us, it's exactly the opposite. So I wanted to give you some feel for that. I mentioned earlier about Japan having regional associations. I had the privilege 2 years ago of attending the Japanese embassy in DC with about 10 people, and I had a presentation on how real estate would say is really done on a regular basis. And I'll give you 2 things that just shocked me. One is you have to take your real estate license is only good for 5 years. And then you have to take the test over every 5 years. The failure rate is over 90%. And I asked we had this lady that was sort of the ambassador of real estate at the embassy there. I said, is it really that difficult? And she said, many people take it 4 or 5 times before they can pass it. So if you're licensed to practice real estate in Japan, it's a big deal. The other thing I thought was very, very unique, even with foreign international buyers, you have to use a local agent in Japan. You cannot negotiate the deal yourself because you're not licensed in that country. And all offers, even with today's technology, all offers in Japan have to be presented in person by a licensed real estate agent to the seller. No matter how much technology is available, that is an ironclad rule. So these customs, when you're trying to decide on what country that you might like to work in, you might want to take a look at that Kiss, Bow, or Shake book, or study the countries that you're in to see if you're comfortable with that. There are some countries that, use the United States dollar as their current. Costa Rica is a great example of that. And Costa Rica has some terrific tax benefits for United States citizens that want to buy property there. All of these places have their nuances. So that gives you a little bit about if you want to research a country. So far, you've got Kiss, Bow, or Shake, or you can go on the NAR website and look at these 55 different global countries and kind of see how their real estate practice works. Amanda, of course, says people have questions. If they'll type them to you, we'll save some time here at the end, but I'll just keep going if that's okay.
That's okay. And just remind everybody, if you have any questions, just type it in the Q&A box, and I will provide these links to you all as well after George's presentation.
That's right. So give me some good questions at the end, and I'll say this too. When this is all done, the presentation's over, I'll be available for the rest of my career to help any of you that want to have direct questions sent to me. I'll help you any way I can possibly do. I will just say it is, as I said before, one of the most fascinating and interesting and financially rewarding niches that I sort of stumbled into 35 years ago, a little bit by accident. All right, now we have global business councils. Here's what I want you to know about that. Global business councils, those are local, global, think of them like committees that are formed at local or state level in all 50 states. You remember there's 50 states, 3 territories, and the District of Columbia. So 130, that's quite a bit. So when you Google that web link there that I showed you, you'll see a map where you can click on any one of those global councils all over the United States, or you can look them up alphabetically. Whatever state you're in, the odds are pretty good you'll find a global council either at the local association level, so I'm clear on what that means, or at the state level. I'll give you an example. The great state of Texas has won several awards with their global councils. And the global councils that seem to operate the best, there's sort of awards they can win every year for job good done. And Texas and the Houston Association of Realtors consistently win awards in those niches. So if you happen to be in Texas, you can either go to the Texas Global Business Council website and look at all of the services and tools they have for you in Texas. If you happen to be in Houston, Houston is the second largest local board in the country, with Miami being the largest. And to give you an idea how big these councils are, there's about 125, let me think here if I get this right. I think there's about 110,000 people in Texas. And there's about the Houston Association of Realtors, about 35,000 members, and Miami's about 40,000 members. Those are the 2 largest local boards. Some of these boards allow you to join them as an affiliate. And I have joined the Miami Association of Realtors as an affiliate for about 20 years. And the reason I do that, I don't get to put my listings on that site. You actually have to join the association, and some let you join and some don't. But they send out a lot of international trade missions that happen that they go on. So these global business councils, not only have educational tools for you, but many of them will have trade missions to different countries once a year, some of them several times a year. My experience has been that Florida probably leads the country on the number of these global business councils, from Naples to Palm Beach, all over the place, and have gotten pretty specializing, and generally they target 2 or 3 countries with regular trade missions. I would say about a third of those global business councils will allow any other realtor from any other state to sign up for one of those trade missions. You got to pay your own way, but they have it completely organized for you. So if you're the kind of person like I was, that I really would rather go with a group and learn from the experts of how to interact in certain countries, that's something I really highly recommend. If you want to educate and find the connections in these global alliance organizations, the one that are 84 different countries and 100 different international, it says companies, it should be countries, international real estate organizations, you can go on the NAR website and look up the global alliances, and those global ambassadors that I mentioned. So since I targeted United Kingdom, as I talked about how they practice real estate there. But let's say that you would like to actually talk to the NAR representative for United Kingdom. His name is Michael Kinney. You could go to Global Alliances and then click down and find United Kingdom. It's an alphabetical order. Click on that and you would find Michael Kinney's contact information, phone number, email address, etc., and say, hey, I'm thinking about trying to develop my business in the United Kingdom. Can you tell me how to get started? What annual conventions do they have? Do they have conventions for land and ranch or vacant land specialties? Do they have luxury specialty conventions? Michael has family in the United K for several generations and goes there 4 or 5 times a year. He's a tremendous resource if you're interested in that country. And he also knows a lot about Ireland. So I wanted to tell you, a global ambassador is a practicing realtor here in the United States that has some kind of unusual connection, heritage, culture with these different countries and organizations, and they are delighted to be asked how to get involved in developing your practice in their country's area of expertise. All of that's available to you without any cost whatsoever. Let's see here, Amanda. Let's look at the next slide. Now, when I started in the global business, I got a little lucky in that 35 years ago, when I actually moved to Telluride 37 years ago, a year or two after I got here, I befriended a contractor and his investor, in other words, his banker, he had become friends with when he developed down in the Caribbean. My friend was Bill Baird, and Bill was a contractor, 5th generation from Boston, that had been developing quite a bit in Puerto Rico and the Caribbean for about 20 years. He made a connection with a wealthy Englishman who lived on an island 200 miles east of New Zealand called Vanuatu, and that's a British tax haven. So that was a little bit of luck of how I stumbled into this. But in the beginning of my career, I didn't have any money. So I had to figure out how to develop my career on low budget. So when I have small budget here and large budget, I'll briefly touch those and then I'll save here 10 minutes for some questions. If you want to, I told you about getting hooked up with global councils, that's one. But also look at your state's Office of Economic Development. For example, in Nevada, you can look up the State Economic Development website and learn that the largest international employers in Nevada are from Canada, in this order: Canada number 1, Germany, United Kingdom, France, and Japan. And those websites will tell you all the businesses they own in a state and where those businesses are. So you might have an international firm investing in your backyard and you don't know about it. It is, I can't, if you are intrigued by this, I highly suggest, just like you as a land broker, get your ALC, go get your global CIPS training. And I suggest try to do that, in my opinion, in an international location, something that you like, or like at Houston or Miami. There's about 4,400 CIPSs in 50 different countries. So that will get you into a network that you can build relationships on and develop your practice. I am still working on my networks all the time. Now Amanda, I think I've run out of my time. So do we have any questions that I can help anybody with?
We do. And first thing I want to mention again, the links that George shared in his presentation earlier, I will send those, share those over with you all on the chat link. And then we do have a question from another attendee. Attendee says, like many of us, they get requests from international people, and they're asking, what information do you want from them right away from those requests?
I'm not sure what you mean. From international buyers or people on this presentation? Explain the question better, please.
Let's see. Buyers. They're asking about buyers.
Okay, say it. I hate to ask
Sorry
you
about
this.
it. Yep, no problem.
But say the question again and let's see if I get it.
He says, like many of us, we get requests from international buyers. What information do you want from them right away? What information do you want from the buyers right away?
Probably the number one thing I do with international buyers and any buyer, what's your timetable? I think that is probably the most important question. What is your timetable? And what is your comfort level? What are your goals with, is it income property, personal use, investment? The same questions you would ask, I think, any buyer. And then from that, I think you can start to strike up a relationship. When I talk about timetable, I'm glad somebody asked that question, by the way. Generally speaking, international buyers like to build relationships before they do business. In other words, they're cautious. They want to get to know you. And that process doesn't mean like 1 or 2 meetings. I kind of hate to tell you this, but that process can be a year or 2. Or sometimes they want to do little transactions with you to just see how it works. And I would say that we Americans sometimes are so business happy, we like to go get the deal done. Internationally, very different process. Slower is better, and let them get comfortable. That's critical. I hope that helps, Amanda.
Thank you, George. And another question in regards to the international buyers. I know the last one is about getting requests from them. This attendee is asking, what is the best way to reach international buyers?
Well, I like that question too. The NAR does a survey every year of international transactions that are done in the United States. You can Google that on the NAR website, and basically you're looking for something that says, let me here, I wrote this down, NAR's annual foreign buyer study. The last one was 2000 last year. So you look at that and read about where the business comes from, and you'll see that about 7,000 realtors that do at least 50% international business or more are the source of that study. And so international, 90% of all of the international business that comes to the United States, 90% is through relationships, commercial and residential. So if somebody said, well, what is the best portal? I happen to like List Global, but I don't want you to get the idea that's how you're going to build your business internationally. You might get lucky, but the odds are against you. I highly suggest you get involved in these local or state global councils, because international business is all about relationship. I hope that helps.
Thank you, George. We have another question that's come in from one of our attendees.
Okay.
He has said he was approached by an international buyer who's looking for development land for high-end ski area housing construction. However, they were unwilling to sign a buyer's agency agreement, and he didn't see the value in working very hard finding properties for them without the benefit of a contractual arrangement. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a tough one. A lot of international people, in fact, I'm in a affluent market. A lot of buyers here will not sign a buyer's broker agreement. And I would say 75% of the time, here's what I do. I test them with a little information to see how they react to it. I don't want to work real hard and not get paid just like you. But I would say dribble out the information cautiously to see how they react to it. If they get engaged and you can see that it appears that they're real or serious, I think you need to build that a little trust before you get to that buyer's broker agreement. That's not a perfect answer, but I think that is the answer.
Thank you again, George. I see we still have a few minutes. Are there any other questions? If so, feel free to type them in the Q&A box. And also we have up on the PowerPoint slide, we have George's contact information. And like he said, feel free to reach out to him after the conference with any questions that you have in regards to his presentation.
That's right, Amanda. I sincerely mean that. I feel like I owe a lot of people in my career that I can't pay back. So to pay them back, I'll do anything in the world to help any one of you.
Okay, we have another question that's come in. What about proving your buyer's capability? Seems like there's a lot of frauds out there. How do you prove up your buyers?
That's a tough one as well. I think that asking a buyer if they have any established banking relationships in the United States is one way to gently approach that question. And I guess that kind of indicates to you whether or not they're a seasoned traveler to the United States. Some potential investors may have banking relationships in the United States for personal use, but haven't decided to do business here until they've made a few trips, but may have banking relationships here. I think that's a fair question to ask.
Okay. If we have any other questions, feel free to do so. Submit them over the Q&A. We don't have any more questions. We'll go ahead and get this wrapped up. George, thank you so much for taking the time today to share your insights and your experience in building a global business. We really do appreciate it. So now stay tuned for the RLI Town Hall and Land Technology Accelerator Showcase that will begin promptly at 2 p.m. Central. Thank you again, George.